When the father of one, Eric, goes to the doctor for a regular checkup, he comes to the shocking realization that he is infertile and most likely has been for his whole life. When Wenna pulls out a picture of who he thought was his son, he suddenly has a shocking realization, something that had been bugging him for a while now. It all started to make sense. But what did Eric see in the picture of his son? What shocking realization did he come to? What had Eric's wife been keeping secret from him, and could he ever forgive her after finding out? Eric can barely see the road through the tears that are welling up in his eyes. He simply cannot believe it, but it is the only explanation for the bombshell the doctor just dropped on him. How could she? How could he? He is almost home now, but still doesn't know what he is going to do. Eric pulls up in the driveway and rushes to his front door. He is so angry, he could kick it in if it meant it would take a millisecond less to confront Jessica. When he opened the door, she was there, waiting for him. Obviously, without any knowledge about the horrible truth Eric had just learned. She greeted him excitedly and asked Eric about his day, but she could quickly tell that something was wrong. And what Eric would say next sends Jessica's world crashing to the ground. But to better understand what just happened, a bit of backstory is required. Eric is a 30-year-old man living with the love of his life, Jessica. The couple met about 6 years ago and have already been living together for 3 of those years. The relationship has by all accounts been a great success, and both parties love each other very much. At least, that's what it looks like. A big obstacle that this couple has had to deal with is that Eric has to be away for work a lot. He often travels and is then away for multiple days in a row. Despite this, the couple still maintains a very healthy and happy relationship. But a lot can happen when someone is alone for a long time. Neither one of them really believes in marriage, so this has never been an option that has been discussed between the pair. They, however, have always been very outspoken that they want to be fully committed to each other. But other desires also started to creep up and maybe cause doubt. Jessica and Eric are both very passionate about the idea of adding to their happy little family. They really want to have children. They always have. Eric knows for sure that he wants those children with Jessica, but there is some unexpected friction coming from her side. Jessica also really wants to have children, but she is hesitant seeing as Eric is away so often. She doesn't want her child to grow up with an often absent father. Because of this, she has had moments of doubt concerning Eric being the right guy for her to stay with if this is always going to be the situation. Eric is faced with a dilemma. He really enjoys the job he has now and it pays very well. And on top of that, he is unsure if he will be able to find a job that also has these benefits. But he knows that he doesn't want to lose the love of his life either. He thinks about it long and hard. Eventually, he comes to the only logical conclusion. He would try and find a way to be home more often, even if it means that he would have to find another job. He discussed everything with his firm, and they tell him that they will find a solution after he returns from his next trip. Eric decided to wait with telling Jessica until he is home again. He had talked to his firm about this while he was on a trip, and he was now sure that it would be his last. He could not wait to give Jessica the good news, but on the day he intended to tell her the news, she actually has a surprise for him. Eric had just come home from his last business trip and finally arrived at his house again. When he opened the door, holding flowers that he had bought, Jessica came rushing towards him with a smile from ear to ear. Eric dropped the flowers in shock when he heard the news. Jessica was pregnant. She had gotten a feeling of nausea when Eric was away and decided to do a test. When it came back positive, she had immediately done 5 more tests, which also all came back positive. She was now waving these tests in Eric's face, who was starting to feel tears well up. He kissed and hugged his girlfriend and felt a wave of happiness come over him. When he told Jessica that this was the last business trip he would ever go on, she couldn't contain her tears either. It just felt like everything was finally falling into place. Or was it? The 9 months of pregnancy went over relatively smoothly. It wasn't easy for Jessica, but nothing out of the ordinary or truly worrisome happened. It was like a massive boost for Jessica to have Eric by her side during this time, as she was first worried he would still be away often. Eric also used this time to settle into his new job. After he had returned from the aforementioned business trip, his firm had presented him with a solution. He was still working for the company, but in a different function. Sadly, this function also had a couple of downsides. The first was that Eric enjoyed this job significantly less than his previous position. He was used to traveling around the country and interacting with people. But now, he was mostly stuck behind a desk in the office building. Eric hated this, but he knew what he was doing it for. The second downside was that it paid a lot less than his previous position. He had taken a step back in the company's structure, and the couple had to adjust their lives based on this new level of income. This brought with it some drastic changes in their lives that neither of them had anticipated. The biggest of these changes was that they could not afford to pay the rent of their house anymore. They had to move to a smaller and cheaper apartment. It was also in a different neighborhood of the city, which meant that the couple would be a lot further away from their friends. Eric had peace with this quite drastic change because he saw it as a small sacrifice to make in order to spend more time with his wife and baby on the way. He was happy with the decision he had made, despite the downsides that came with it. Jessica saw this a bit differently. She had gotten used to living a relatively high society life. They were never rich, but money trouble was never something they had to worry about. That all changed with Eric's new job, and it took a lot of adjusting for Jessica, which she was obviously struggling with. She is becoming more moody and distant from Eric on occasion. He even has the feeling that Jessica has sometimes trouble looking him in the eyes. Eric mainly attributed this reaction to her just being hormonal from the pregnancy. Or could something else maybe be going? Despite all this, Eric felt that his relationship with Jessica was still growing stronger during the pregnancy, and because of the fact that he was able to spend a lot of time with her. But little did he know, this relationship was going to face its biggest obstacle yet. After 9 months, the couple's child was finally brought into the world. It was a boy, and they named him Stephen. They were absolutely over the moon that everything had gone swimmingly, and that their child had been born in good health. They felt ready for the rest of their lives. Raising little Stephen was an absolute pleasure for Eric and Jessica. The pair wanted to spend as much time as possible with him. They, however, did start to feel like their financial problems were getting bigger with everything they had to spend on their son, and this brought a lot of stress. Jessica didn't want to start working, as she argued that she had to be there for Stephen all the time. It was decided that Eric had to start working more again. He did manage to be home every evening, but this left Jessica alone almost every afternoon. And Eric was clueless as to what she was using this time for. All this hard work and stress that came with his new life had Eric not feeling his best after a couple of months. He decided to visit their doctor for a checkup and to hopefully get a prescription for something. But what he would find out at the doctor's would shock poor Eric. After the doctor had a conversation with him, they decided to do a full basic checkup to see if anything was actually wrong with Eric. This was very normal for guys of his age, and the doctor found this a perfect time for it, seeing as Eric had additional complaints for which he could not determine the exact cause. Eric would have to wait about a week for the results, so he went home after the checkup. He was home a little earlier than expected, and when he opened the door, he was surprised to not hear Jessica greet him, as she would always do. He called out for her and got a response from an unexpected place. It was coming from their bedroom. This is itself not that weird, but 9 times out of 10, Jessica was downstairs with Stephen when he would come home. What is also noticeable was that it took Jessica until Eric was halfway up the stairs to come out of the room to greet him. She tells Eric that she was busy doing laundry and was just finishing up when he arrived. Eric was not 100% sure about what to think of the situation, but he didn't really bother questioning it, seeing as he had no reason to suspect Jessica of anything. No reason yet, at least. Eric tells Jessica about the checkup he just had. He isn't really worried that it will discover anything serious, but you never know for sure. So for the next week, Eric does carry around some nervous energy. Jessica does not really share his nervousness, as she seems preoccupied with something else. Besides the not that noteworthy incident of Jessica not coming to greet him at the door when he came home early, Eric had started to notice some odd behavioral changes in his girlfriend. She had seemed to be getting more distant from him, and then he remembered when he had noticed it before. Jessica had behaved very similarly for a couple of weeks before he found out she was pregnant. Eric figured that this was because she was upset that he was away so often. But this time he could not really find a reason for it. Was it again something that he was doing wrong? Between work and worries about Jessica, the week he had to wait for the test results flew by. Eric knew that these kinds of results would frequently be shared over the phone, as making another appointment was often unnecessary. Often, but not always. As expected, on the day the test results were in, Eric got a call from his doctor. Seeing the name of his doctor appear on the mobile screen already calmed Eric down and made him feel like nothing serious would be wrong with him. But when he picked up the phone, his doctor had an unexpected message for him. His doctor did not want to share any of the results with Eric over the phone and wanted him to come by his practice that same afternoon to go discuss them. Eric agreed, but this did make him very worried. What could be so bad that the doctor could not tell him over the phone? What was wrong with him? Almost shaking with fear, Eric drove to the doctor that afternoon. When he entered the office, the doctor first assured him that he wasn't seriously ill or anything like that. They only found some small things that could be helped with a change in diet and more exercise. Eric was very relieved to hear this, but also very confused. Why would the doctor need to see him in person to tell him this? Right when he was about to ask the doctor about him, Eric noticed that he seemed to be holding back. There was something else Eric needed to know. The doctor seemed to be struggling to find a way to say what he needed to say. Eric got a little impatient with him, as he couldn't take the anticipation anymore. Finally, the doctor went, "Eric, there is no easy way to say this, but we discovered that you're infertile, and most likely have been for all your life." Eric was completely stumped by what the doctor told him. Infertile. But how? He had a son. The doctor explained that that was why he found it so difficult to tell him this. He knew the family even before their son Stephen was born, and knew what implication this discovery had. There is a chance that maybe you were fertile many years ago, seeing as it is near impossible to retrospectively make conclusions about this. But they could determine with certainty that around the time Eric's son was conceived, he had been infertile. Eric felt his world crumble around him in an instant. "How is this possible, doctor? What are you saying?" The doctor hesitated, but did respond with a clear answer, leaving nothing to doubt for Eric. "What I'm saying is that there is no possible way that Stephen is your son." Tears started rolling down Eric's face. He felt his legs go weak as he let himself fall back into the chair that was behind him. He took a picture of Stephen out of his wallet and tried to look at it through a curtain of his own tears. Then he suddenly had a realization. Eric had always felt like Stephen had something familiar in his face that reminded him of somebody other than himself or Jessica. He was never able to place it because he hadn't taken the time to try and make the connection. He never had a reason to do so before this was revealed to him. Eric quickly thanked the doctor and drove home. All kinds of emotions were shooting through his body. Sadness that Eric wasn't his son. Uncertainty if Jessica had known this already. Anger for what he believed her to have done. And a million more. He could barely focus on the road while driving. Suddenly, everything started to fall into place for Eric. The change in behavior, the time period, the incident a week ago. He was figuring out exactly what happened on the way home and was ready to confront Jessica with all this. He needed answers from her, but above all, he wanted a reason. He was home in 10 minutes, where it should have normally taken him 20 at the very least, eager to confront his girlfriend. He had no idea how many red lights he hit, but he didn't care. All his mind could focus on was Jessica. When he opened the door, she greeted him as usual, but she could immediately tell something was wrong. Without giving any kind of proper information, all Eric could mutter is, "Why Jessica?" She seemed confused and asked him to explain. He repeated it again and again. Jessica stumbled for a second, but could see that something was seriously wrong. Suddenly, Eric saw the realization set in for Jessica. Her whole demeanor changed in an instant. From a face shaped by confusion to one dominated by fear and sadness. Tears started to well up in her eyes. There was no point in hiding it anymore. Eric had figured it out. "How did you know?" she asked. "What did the doctor tell you?" When Eric explains that he is infertile and has been all his life, he sees a genuine shock come over Jessica, and she falls on her knees crying. With tears in his eyes, Eric proclaims, "I know that Bobby is Stephen's real father." Bobby was a very good friend of Jessica and was around a lot before Stephen was born. But after that, Eric never really saw him anymore. Jessica had told him that he had moved away, and that she only really spoke to him over the phone or via text. Eric picked Stephen up, who had crawled in by now, and they all went into the living room. Looking at the little who he had always considered to be his flesh and blood, Eric can't contain his emotions any longer. He breaks down crying as well, and now even little Stephen is joining in. Eric and Jessica have a long and difficult conversation. She admits that she and Bobby had an affair for a couple of weeks before she got pregnant. By that point, she had little faith in the relationship with Eric because she didn't believe he would give up his job. She had always believed Eric was Stephen's father, but recently she started having doubts. She had noticed more and more how much Stephen started to look like Bobby. A week ago, she had called him about it, but he wanted nothing to do with Stephen and would not admit that there was any possibility he was the father. That was the day Eric had come home early from the doctor. Eric has an extremely difficult decision to make now that the truth has finally come out. How does he want to move on with his life? Does he want to stay with Jessica, who cheated on him but clearly shows remorse? And does he want to keep being a father to Stephen, even though he is not his real son? In the end, Eric decides to follow his heart. There was never any doubt in his mind that he would still be a father to Stephen. His love for him has not diminished at all, and if he is truly honest with himself, neither has his love for Jessica. Yes, she made a mistake. But he knew that with time he would be able to forgive her. They will try to move on, together, as a family.